Good evening, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to the February edition of Eureka Whiskey Club virtual tasting. We just got in time. We just got it last day of February. We just made it in time for the tasting. So thanks for your patience, everybody. I know pickup was a couple weeks ago, but we're really excited about this month's pick. Featuring Stellum whiskey and their bourbon. And we are honored, as always, to have two special guests with us tonight. One is a familiar face and one is a fresh face. So I think we'll start with the familiar face just to give everyone a recap. If you weren't a member back in November when we did a feature of Barrel Craft's Seagrass, we are joined by Stephanie Bear again. Stephanie, can you introduce yourself to those who are new to the club and reintroduce yourself to those that maybe have seen you before?
Yeah, of course. Sure. Hi, everybody. As Trevor said, my name is Stephanie Bear. I am the Director of Sales West for Barrel Craft Spirits and Stellum Spirits, based in Denver, Colorado, and managing the West. So I'm really excited to be back here. I had a lot of fun doing this in November with Will Schragus, our Chief Sales Officer, talking about Barrel Seagrass. We're going to have fun tonight talking about Stellum Bourbon.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. And Brian, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Brian Heese. I am the Brand Development Manager for Barrel Craft Spirits and Stellum Spirits. I'm based out of Detroit, Michigan, and I'm really excited to be here with everybody tonight. Like you all, I'm a huge lover of whiskey, and I can't wait to talk about Stellum Bourbon with you all.
All right. And I'm going to go ahead and just start off by pouring myself some.
Nice.
It's been a bit of a day. So before we dive right into learning more about Stellum, just wanted to get some housekeeping out of the way as normal. Stellum has been generous to provide some prizes for this evening. So as always, we highly encourage participation and Q&A for the end of the call. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're watching on Facebook, feel free to leave your question in the comment section. As always, if your name is not the name associated with your membership, whatever you're logged in at, is that it's not the same name as the name in your membership, just make sure you put your name as well so we know what your membership is under. But excited to hear some questions from the audience. And without further ado, we're going to kind of dive right in here. So, this first question, I'm going to kind of direct it to Brian because, Stephanie, we kind of asked you the similar question, and, I'll give you an opportunity to kind of answer it again. But, Brian, what led you to the spirits industry? What was your path to where you are today?
Yeah, so my journey started through hospitality, which I think is pretty common. So I just fell in love with hospitality and taking care of people, which led me to be behind a bar for quite a few years, running bar programs and interacting with different spirits brands, and really having the opportunity to tell the stories of all of the different bottles that were on the shelf behind me. So that passion of talking about all those spirits on a hospitality perspective jumped me over to the other side on the brand side, and jumping in and started working with spirits directly and being able to tell those stories a little bit more intimately with people. And just in love with doing that.
Awesome. And Stephanie, same question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to Brian and similar to a lot of people, I was in hospitality before I got into the spirit sales sides of things. I was in New York City, a poor, broke journalism and Spanish major, trying really hard to find whatever freelance journalism work I could find in the middle of the recession, and needed like a fourth job. So I started working in bars and restaurants. I did that for a couple of years, and I was working at a very, very well-known whiskey bar in New York City called American Whiskey, which is by Madison Square Garden. And it was kind of place where we had mandatory weekly staff training. So every Tuesday at 3 p.m., you had to come in and sit in on a staff training with a brand ambassador or a supplier representative. And I sat through some really good ones, and I sat through some really bad ones. And that was kind of when I realized, oh, there's like a career here. Each of these bottles behind this bar has a story. They have dozens, if not hundreds of people working on them nationally, globally. And there's like a whole world out there that I want to explore. So I was fortunate enough to be at a big enough bar where we had a lot of brand attention, and I just started kind of chatting with people and figuring it out. Started doing in-store tastings and staff trainings at other local bars, like part-time, actually for Barrel Craft Spirits 6 years ago, back in 2016, and did that part-time while I still bartended. And then I left them to go to a couple of larger companies for a period of years, and then they invited me back to move to Denver and live in the mountains and ski and hike and sell whiskey. So that's what I do now.
What a terrible life.
It's awful. I hate it.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for the introductions. And I guess, Brian, I'll direct this to you. Can you maybe just tell us a brief history of Stellum? How it started, how, it was kind of birthed out of the barrel craft world, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think what's really great about Stellum is it is a relatively new brand. So it's going to launch in roughly the middle of last year to really have a new voice in the bourbon and rye cask strength category. What's really great about the Stellum bourbon is that it's blended for consistency's sake. So from the same team of us at Barrel Craft Spirits that's known for our expertise in blending really great source whiskeys from around the US and world. The Stellum bourbon is blended for consistency's sake. So every time that you grab a bottle of Stellum off the shelf at your local liquor store, you always know what you're getting into flavor-wise. So it really gave a really luxurious blend of 5 different bourbon mash bills brought together into a single bottle. And it's a really amazing, unique, delicious product.
So I guess what was the reason that, why not just release these whiskeys under the barrel name? Like why the need for for lack of a better term, an offshoot or a sub brand underneath the barrel name?
Absolutely. And I'm going to deflect to Stephanie on this because I love the way that she tells the story about the name of Stellum and putting a brand into the 21st century. So I'll let her talk about that here.
Well, it's just mullets backwards, right? That's all it is.
That was it. Yeah.
I was actually sorry. Because I told you guys I cut my hair. My hair was pretty long up till earlier today, and I was in the barber chair, and he said, "You have enough hair back here to do a mullet. Did you want to do that?" And there was a brief second
opportunity
where I said, "Maybe I should," and then I thought about what my wife would say, and I was like, no, just regular haircuts. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you text her in the chair and be like, "Hey, honey, what do you think about this?"
I had joked with her before I went that I was going to get a mullet, and it was not met with rave reviews. So, anyways,
I get it. Anyway, so to answer your question, on the barrel craft side of things, like bourbons are our bread and butter. We founded Barrel in 2013, and we're still known to this day colloquially as Barrel Bourbon, even though we now produce rye, American whiskey, and rum. And on the barrel side, the bourbons that we make are intentionally what we call batches. So they are unique, limited edition, never reproduced, small batch, single production runs of different blends of different bourbons from different states, ages, and flavor profiles. And that's kind of what we're known for. That's how we launched the company. That's what we make consistently every year. We release maybe 4 or 5 of those every year. And so we really pride ourselves on one of the pillars at the Barrel Craft Spirits side of things, which is constantly innovating, constantly releasing new things. And so to have a consistent blend of bourbon under the Barrel name, it wouldn't quite fit what we're doing with bourbon over at Barrel Craft Spirits. That being said, we did recognize that there was a need in our portfolio of products to have, as Brian mentioned, a consistent blend. So something that is blended to taste, no matter where you are in the country or the world, whether it's this year or in 10 years, whenever you pick that bottle up, it's always going to taste the same. So you kind of always know what you're getting. It becomes your kind of go-to everyday bourbon that hopefully everybody has at their back bar, for the end of a long day or for a party or something like that. And in order to kind of separate that a little bit from the idea of Barrel, those single production limited edition runs of bourbons, we created a second brand and called it Stellum Spirits. So we're keeping sort of in the the tradition of barrel, and that everything that we make on the Stellum side is cask strength and it's blended, with the exception, of course, of our single barrel program. And we're keeping in the same sort of idea of innovation and exploration within the craft whiskey industry, but we're doing it a little bit more with experimenting on the traditional classic American flavor profile of bourbon, which is that classic Indiana bourbon, those mash bills that Brian mentioned earlier that come out of MGP in Indiana that everybody kind of is really familiar with, knows, and loves. So taking that as a base and then building upon it to create a unique, elevated, everyday American bourbon flavor profile bourbon, as opposed to something at barrel, which is constantly changing and not necessarily focused on classic traditional flavor profiles, trying to find something barrels that are really interesting, really unique, really different, and creating flavor profiles that are totally,
like classic
totally different.
Flavor profiles. Can you just maybe elaborate that on a little bit more, like what the criteria is that you're looking for?
Yeah, can I bounce that to Brian?
Yeah,
because I know Brian loves talking about classic bourbon flavor profiles.
Well, there's going to be like your classic notes of vanilla, caramel, baking spices. I think Stellum bourbon really gives you a lot of nice raw cinnamon, kind of nice baking spice flavors. And those are the things that are very much rooted in classic bourbon. So that's, I would think, to answer that question for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Bourbon's, a really traditional spirit. It's been around for, almost 200 years now, I think. It was like early 1800s, right, Brian, that bourbon first came about?
Sounds good to me.
Roughly, like legally?
Legally, yeah. It's a whole other thing, too.
Yeah, lots of things have been around for a long time before they were actually defined. But yeah, the really interesting notes that you get.
I don't think it was actually defined until the early 1900s?
I would have to Google it.
Semantics.
Yeah, but those, again, like that, what he's talking about, like that oak, that caramel, that vanilla, that butterscotch, that toffee, those notes that come out of American oak, charred American oak.
Cool. And then I know we joked about the name, but where does the name stem from with Stellum?
Yeah, so the name Stellum comes from the Latin word stella, which is Latin for star, as well as the Latin word stellium, which is stellum with an I. Which means a group of a group of 4 or more astrological objects under one planetary house, which is a very verbose way of talking about astrology, I guess. But the idea for the brand was that we were going to be hanging on sort of the pillars of the barrel craft side of things, which is exploring, discovering, elevating, but taking it kind of into the 21st century. And kind of reimagining classic American bourbon and American rye flavor profiles. And so what kind of fits with a modern sort of brand name and brand idea when you're talking about exploration and discovery in the 21st century? Elon Musk, Tesla, I don't know, outer space. And so that's kind of where the idea for the name came from. Joe Beatrice, who is the owner of both Barrel Craft Spirits and Stellum Spirits, is a massive, grew up during the Cold War, is a massive, I wouldn't say fan of Elon Musk, but he's really interested in what he's trying to do with commercializing space travel. And so, yeah, that was something that he thought about when he was trying to figure out how to name the brand, and just kind of stuck.
Was he a big Star Trek fan? I think I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, Joe's a pretty big nerd. I'm not going to lie. He's a cask strength whiskey blender, so you've got to have a certain level of nerdiness to be really good at that job. But yeah, I think he's pretty heavy on the Star Trek, although I have not talked to him too much about that. I am a Star Wars fan myself. If I had to pick between Trek and Wars, I'd go Wars all day.
I think I stray a little bit more toward the Wars than I do Star Trek, but
yeah,
but that's cool. It's always awesome to hear the names behind things, and it is not mullets backwards. Sorry, Jason. That was a question from one of our audience members, but I did have it teed up for my questions as well. My wife will have to wait on the mullet, I guess, until I grow my hair out again. So we talked a lot about like the mash bills. So there's 3 different Indiana MGP sourced mash bills, if I understand correctly. And then that makes up about 80% of the blend, and the other 20% comes from Kentucky and Tennessee, right?
I'm not sure about exact percentages. but you are right. We build the blend on a base of 3 different MGP bourbon mash bills, each that highlight that, again, that classic American bourbon flavor profile, and create that as a base, and then layer in older barrels from Kentucky and Tennessee on top of that.
And what are the 3 mash bills?
Brian?
Yeah, so the 3 from Indiana are going to be 2 high rye mash bills. So one particular is 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% malted barley. The second is 60% corn, 36% rye, and 4% malted barley. And then the third from Indiana is a 99% corn mash bill. So super cool and unique. We really love the flavors that 99% corn mash bill comes in. And it's definitely one that I like talking about and people love to talk about. But as far as I understand it, and Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, it is the smallest component of that entire blend, but a very interesting one nonetheless.
That's got to add quite a bit of just that much corn. It's got to add a lot of body to that that whiskey.
A lot of body, a lot of sweetness. Yeah, it really rounds out, considering that the remainder of all the other mash bills are going to be considered high rye mash bills. It's really nice to kind of add that influence from the corn for sure.
Yeah, I'm in Atlanta right now. We had a barrel picking event today with our distributor here in Georgia. And we just launched a new set of single barrel bourbons on the barrel side of things. And it's about 30 barrels that are that 8-year-old Indiana 99% corn, 1% malt barley mash bill. And so I got to taste almost all of those today throughout the course of the day. And Brian's
just
right.
Those barrels, just that mash bill, those barrels.
Well, we had 175 samples open today, but 30 of them are the 99 corn, 1% malt barley, 8-year-old Indiana bourbons.
Were those just like butterscotch caramel bombs?
Oh, they're insane. It's crazy how different they are, though. I mean, they're all like roughly in that 108, 107 to 111 proof. So they're on the lower. Everything we do is cast strength, so that's still cast strength, but that's on the lower proof for us. Most of our sweet spot is usually between 112 and 120, generally speaking. And so that lower proof combined with the 8-year age statement and that mash bill just results in some really, really interesting barrels. Some of them are really chewy, juicy fruit, like chewing gum, almost like a powdered bubble gum kind of sugar. Some of them are super cereal forward and really malty and kind of barnyardy. And there are a handful that have these really interesting ground coffee and lapsang tea, like a smoky tea kind of note to them. They're really fascinating.
I'm jealous.
Barrels?
We sold quite a few. I think we sold 20 of the 30 of those that we had today. And actually, Will, who is at a dinner right now, hosting some private buyers and maybe selling more of them. I know he has a bunch of them with him.
Well, if it's the Will that I've met, then he probably is selling a lot.
I'm sure, yeah.
Cool. Sorry, I got sidetracked, but making stupid jokes. But what the 20%, or I said you didn't know you said you didn't know the percentages, but the blend that you guys use from Kentucky and Tennessee, is that used in any other products, including barrel stuff, or? Because the Indiana stuff, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, is not used. It's just used for Stellum. Is that right? Or is there cross utilization between all these, between Stellum and obviously Stellum is the consistent brand, but are any of these mash bills or they're being used for other stuff too?
Yeah, so we work primarily, especially with the barrel bourbon batches that we produce maybe 4 or 5 of every year. We're sourcing primarily from Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee for those. So while we don't disclose the mash bills that we use in those blends, because we're using literally dozens of bourbons for each barrel bourbon batch, and so to list out the mash bills would just be more work than it's worth, truthfully, because barrel is really more about what the final product is as opposed to the different ingredients that went into it. We do source pretty heavily from Indiana for a lot of those. So a lot of the whiskey, the mash bills, or rather the profiles that you would find in the Indiana bourbons that we use in Stellum often turn up as a blending ingredient in the barrel. They're not meant to be the focus, but they are there because they often release kind of like a really interesting sort of tropical fruit sort of note that works really nicely with some of the other bourbons that we work with from Kentucky and Tennessee that have a lot more peppery, kind of assertive rye spice that balances with the tropical fruit really nicely. So yeah, we use Indiana both with barrel and with Stellum. Although to be fair, we do use different sets of barrels for each brand. And so as we're going through and our blending team is tasting the barrels that are available for sale, they're tasting different lots of barrels that they know are specifically going to be, this entire lot of several hundred barrels is going to be Stellum. And this entire lot of a couple dozen or 100 is going to be a barrel ingredient. And they kind of sort them that way.
Awesome. And I get, is that based on flavor profile solely, or is it the, Stellum obviously is a great whiskey, I think I heard Will tell me at one point, it was like the reason that the price point of Stellum is because you guys felt like that, that market, you wanted to be the best whiskey in that, kind of price point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably like this whiskey, I think the juice is good, so good you could charge more for it, but you wanted to be, the best whiskey at that that price point. So it's like, are you factoring in that when selecting barrels, where it's like, hey, I think these barrels are maybe just slightly better, and they go to barrel, and then we like these barrels a lot, and these go to Stellum, or is it just solely based on like flavor profile?
It's really more, yeah. I mean, it's really more about flavor profile, and certainly the number of barrels within that flavor profile that are available. We come across lots of different sets of barrels because we work with lots of different people. We have about 75 different producers that we work with, both nationally and internationally, depending on what product you're looking at on either side of the brands. And so, yeah, it's a lot more to do with the flavor profile. But if we get, a few dozen barrels that are like really interesting, they're probably not going to wind up going into Stellum because we don't have enough of them to really have them be a meaningful ingredient in a batch of, or rather a blend of Stellum or a bottling of Stellum that we're putting together. So those will usually wind up as either single barrels or something cool and interesting, limited edition that we run on the barrel craft spirit side of things.
Awesome. Well, I've already enjoyed a little bit, but let's, for those at home that maybe are just cracking your bottles, or you've had it for about, I think a little over 10 days now. You're more patient than I if you haven't cracked your bottle yet, but let's go ahead and pour some Stellum bourbon and talk about these lovely flavor profiles. As always, please feel free to share your tasting notes in the comments. If you're watching via YouTube or Facebook, it's always nice to see what other people say, and you may not smell or taste something, and then someone says it and you're like, that's what I was trying to put my finger on. So really quick, we talked about the mash bills, we've talked about this kind of being a more consistent product, but was there a reason for the 114.98 proof? Because that's what all Stellum is bottled at, right?
So it's a cast strength blend. So the reason is because that's what the blend led us to proof wise. But being a cast strength blend and not add any water for dilution, that means that the proof can vary from release from batch to batch.
Okay. All right. So it will, or it may change.
When we're not adding water, it's hard to, and we can get close, but it's all flavor driven. So being flavor driven, the blend really tells us when we're done with it.
Cool. Stephanie, you're not drinking with us tonight.
I actually, I'm stuck in my hotel room, and my sample bottle of Stellum is in Will's room. So, and I have his laptop and his blazer, but not his room key. So, I'm
sorry to hear that.
I do have these really interesting Sonic hard seltzers that I'm going to crack into later, though.
What, Sonic? Like the...
Yeah, our distributor in Georgia just picked these up, and Will and I found them.
Like the drive-through burger place.
Yeah, and we were like, well, we're going to take these for the hotel later, so this is what I'm drinking.
Stephanie is plugging Sonic tonight.
Co-branded.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know if I should. Oh, so well.
Yeah,
if
so
anyone
I
from
mean,
Sonic is watching, get at me.
yeah. Next time we see Stephanie, she's gonna be in a Sonic hat, Sonic hoodie. We're gonna have a Sonic barrel pick from Stellum. Sonic barrel pick.
Sonic and Stellum, it just works.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, yeah, I mean those classic kind of bourbon notes are definitely, you know, popping a lot for me. I think like tons of caramel and toffee on the nose. Get a little bit of like tangerine, or like, you know, just like a little bit of pop of some type of citrus on the nose. But I think really those just kind of classic bourbon notes that we all know and love, vanilla, caramel, toffee, are really just the main standouts for me. And then like kind of on the back end, I'm getting a little bit of that citrus zest. Brian, would you know?
Absolutely.
It well?
I think, yeah, I mean, you said tangerine. I think some sort of like stone fruit, soft, fleshy, like nectarine or something like that for sure on the nose. I always get that. Some sort of like nut influence, some of like maybe like a softer like macadamia nut or something like that as well too.
Yeah, and I can really, I mean, just again, I'm biased based off of having the information, but I can really just like kind of tell that 99% corn. I can get those like deep, like butterscotch, marshmallowy kind of body that I'm used to in like a high, sometimes like a very high corn. So, you know, I've had 100% corn whiskeys, but there is a good amount of spice and baking spices here as well, kind of towards the finish, and it kind of lingers with you. Josh Johnson says plenty of baking spices on the nose. Kyle Rogers is saying honeysuckle.
Oh, nice.
Stephanie, do you have are we on the right track here?
Yeah, you totally are. It's funny that you mentioned tangerine, because I had mentioned earlier in the tasting that a lot of the 4 to 6 year old Indiana bourbon that we work with as the base of the Stellum bourbon blend, those 2 high rye mash bills that Brian had mentioned earlier, those have a lot of those kind of tropical fruit sort of notes to them. So that's where that tangerine note is coming from. That's coming from those younger Indiana bourbons that go into the blend. That more kind of assertive, almost like that vanilla and that like creaminess that you're talking about. A lot of that coming from those 99% corn Indiana bourbons, which many of which are 8 years old, as we learned today when we launched those in the barrel program. And then the older bourbons, because again, Stellum bourbon is a blend of bourbons between 4 and 16 years old. So not only looking at different states and different mash bills, but you're also looking at 12 years worth of age that has a ton of influence on the whiskey that is sitting in the barrels over that decade plus amount of time. And so those older barrels that we're layering in from Kentucky and Tennessee that are heavy on the 10 to 16 year age range, those are almost like we like to call those like the pheno sherries of our portfolio. Brian mentioned macadamia nut. That's a great tasting note that comes from those older bourbons. We call them like the pheno sherries of our portfolio because they don't mess anything up. They're only going to make anything better that you add them to. And you can just layer them in very, very slowly, barrel by barrel on top of the base blend until you have just like a really nice kind of soft, rounded, again, kind of soft, nutty quality. So I really like finding that note when I'm drinking this for sure.
And so you said, I mean, there's no age statement on this, but I think average is what, 6 years around there. And maybe sometimes, you're using tons of different blends, but I mean, is that like I don't really focus too much on age statement, but I know it is important to some. Is that kind of a safe range of, maybe around 6 years on average?
So a range of 6 years in the blend, or a range of?
Well, I know like you can't put, you have to put the lowest year on the bottle, and you guys don't put it, but I'm just saying, like, again, I'm sure it varies per batch, but like if you were saying there's some of it could be 12-year barrels, others can be as low as 4,
Yep.
like.
Yeah.
I don't want to focus too much on age statement because, but I know some people are curious.
No, I know what you mean. So the crux of the blend lies in the 4 to 8 year age range. That's where a lot of the Indianas are. If you're familiar with the single barrel side of things, with Stellum single barrel bourbon, we have a couple different groups, or we call them clusters, because we name them after constellations. So it kind of works that way. But we have a couple different groups that are both 4 and 5 years old. So a lot of and they're all that 75% corn, 21% rye, 4% malt barley mash bill. So a lot of that particular mash bill is 4, 5, and some 6-year-old. And then of course those 99% corns are almost all 8 years old, between 7 and 8. So 4 to 8 year Indiana is really the main component that we then layer the older bourbons on top of.
So I'm gonna make a cocktail. This is the featured recipe that we have this month. It's just classic whiskey cocktail. Some people like rye in their Boulevardier. Some people prefer bourbon. I'm kind of just like whatever is available, or what's best. When I was trying to come up with a cocktail for this, I was playing around with some liqueurs I had in my house, and I had this Merengue, the wild cherry liqueur. It's like similar to Campari. It's a bitter aperitivo, but it has a little bit of some bright cherry notes to it. I think people like see wild cherry liqueur and you think of something like super sweet. This is not that by any means. So if you want to join me at home, it's just 3 equal parts. So 1 ounce of the wild cherry liqueur, 1 ounce of Stellum bourbon. If you like more bourbon forward Boulevardiers, up to 1.5 ounces. Sometimes I'm on that train, but for balance purposes, I'm going to keep it equal parts. And then we have some sweet vermouth. Got my ice. I am all out of single large ice cubes because apparently I didn't close my freezer door all the way a couple nights ago, and
brutal.
Ice cubes melted.
Yeah. Sounds like you're working with some good ice over there, though. Sounds nice and clunky.
It's just the ice from my my freezer in my house, and it's actually pretty good. They have like the pretty
solid.
big ice.
Yeah.
That's why I told my wife when we bought our house, I said, I'm not buying a house unless it has, good ice.
Spoken like a true bartender.
She didn't quite understand, but it was something that I was like, I want to make sure that we have something. Awesome. So, yeah. Solid cocktail. The sweetness of the bourbon kind of helps complement the bitterness of the aperitivo, and you get that little bright pop of cherry, and a little bit not as quite as bitter as using Campari. So, cheers.
I have a fondness in my heart for a Boulevardier. That's one of the first drinks that I because I learned how to make a Negroni, right, when I was bartending, and I was really disgusted by them. I thought Campari was the worst thing in the history of liqueur, and I couldn't understand why anybody wanted to drink it. But then, I got used to it, and now I love a Negroni. But then when I worked at the whiskey bar and learned what a Boulevardier was early on in my career, I was like, oh, you can take ingredients that exist for some cocktail and then just change one thing about it, and then it's a totally different cocktail. And my bar manager was like, yeah, it's called a riff on a classic. And I was like, what? And just blew my mind. And so just from there, all the doors
tequila
open.
mules were going out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Just name it.
Side tangent, because you brought it up. One of my favorite riffs on a classic is a mezcal Negroni. I love a mezcal Negroni. And when I make them at home, I have a house-made ghost pepper tincture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this smoky, spicy, bitter, sweet. I don't know. It's just like one of my favorite things in the world is a spicy mezcal Negroni.
Oh, so delicious.
Sounds delicious. I mean, that build, you can't beat it. Everybody, I hope you're enjoying your Boulevardier. Also, one of my favorite cocktails, if not my favorite cocktail. And the beautiful thing is you don't have to be perfect. It's really hard to ever mess it up. It's always delicious. You can just dump it all in a glass, fill it with ice, and drink away. So good.
Totally.
And I was really happy. I try to stay off the Facebook group sometimes, but sometimes I'm curious. And I was really excited to see some of our members in San Diego really embracing the wild cherry liqueur, and like they were posting different recipes using it. And I was so kudos and shout out to our San Diego members who were jazzed on the wild cherry liqueur.
Nice.
Cool. I think we can start heading into questions now. We got a decent amount. As always, just again, if you haven't asked a question yet, feel free to type it in the chat, and we'll try to get to everybody. And we have some really cool prizes. If you joined late, just to recap, we're giving away 2 prizes tonight. One is a signed bottle of Stellum Terra, which I believe it was an online release only. Is that a single barrel pick, or can you tell us a little bit about the Stellum Terra and get people excited?
Yeah, no, it is a blend that Joe made that is a much more limited edition run. That was kind of some of his favorite kind of flavor profiles that he noticed when he was putting together these barrels, or these blends rather, for these barrels. And so it's a little bit lower proof, actually, I believe. I'm pretty sure. Brian, do you mind checking really quickly? It's on our site. I believe it's like 109. But I'll let him confirm that for me. So it's still cask strength, but a little bit lower proof, a little bit of some heavier use on those older, lower proof Fino sherry barrels, if you will, that put those like really interesting kind of nutty flavors forward. And again, only available online or at we don't do tourism yet, but we're building a new facility, and it will be available for sale at the facility once we're up and running for tourism.
You're not gonna be there next week, are you, when I'm there?
No, yeah. We're there this week. It's our national sales meeting, so we're all flying there tomorrow night or Wednesday morning. But then I think Will's actually gonna be in Kentucky next week. I'm gonna be in Northern California with Monica.
Well, I'm sorry we'll miss you. I'm excited to
Me too.
Excited to go to Kentucky. It's been a few years.
It'll be fun. I'll just be eating at a Eureka burger in San Francisco or something. So we'll just trade.
Brian, are you ready to report back?
Well, I do not, but Monica is with the assist here on the text. It's 56.77% here.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's actually higher than it. A little bit higher, 112.
I'm on Google Chrome for this format, and it wasn't taking to me all my links here. So
it happens. Yeah.
All right.
56%
go ahead.
alcohol. No, you're good. You're good.
And then the second prize, we have a kind of a swag bag with merch, a t-shirt, sweatshirt, hat, tote bag, pin pack, and an insulated travel mug. So 2 cool prizes. So if you haven't asked a question, or you have and you think you have a better question, then feel free to ask it, and we'll just start diving in here. Kyle Rogers, was there a reason behind the label being textured as it was, or was it just how you decided to print it?
I can take that one.
Go for it.
It's actually, that texture is the Milky Way galaxy, which leans into the star, stellium, all of that situation. So if you kind of look at it a little more in detail, it's actually the galaxy.
Yeah, it's the Milky Way. Yeah, good point. It's an actual photograph of the Milky Way galaxy that we, I guess, superimposed. Would that be the word? Yeah.
That's actually it's like an Easter egg. That's super cool.
Yeah.
We tend to do that a little bit.
Great question. Kevin Bird asks, with as innovative as Barrel is, do you foresee any sort of mashup using Stellum, like the collaborations we have been seeing from other distilleries lately?
I don't think that is coming anytime soon. I think that's a great question, and it's a really good observation, I think, on trends that are happening in the whiskey industry, because certainly we are seeing a lot of collaboration.
It's so crazy that's like taken. I'm just sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Like I'm coming, working in the craft beer world for so long, like collaborations have been around for so long, and it's just like, I don't know, it's exciting to see, but anyways, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, not at all. You're totally right. It's really exciting, and I think it speaks a lot to like where the industry's at as a whole, where different producers are willing to broadcast that they're working with each other and create these cool limited edition things, and the consumers, the people, are looking for that kind of a thing and buying it, which generates more reason for people to continue making those kinds of things. So that's a really good observation, and truthfully, no one's ever asked me that before. It's a really good question. But on the Barrel and Stellum side of things, we're really focused on continuing to partner with the people that we already work with to create our blends, but keeping it kind of under one house right now. So the whole kind of ethos of our company is taking, different barrels, treating them as ingredients, and creating a final product that is totally greater than the sum of its parts. So again, treating barrels like ingredients to create a totally unique product, and focusing less on what those individual ingredients are. We talk a little bit about, the methodology, the flavor profiles, sort of the base things that you need to know to talk about what the thought process was of creating those blends. But then getting any more into it kind of, I think, detracts from the overall kind of idea, which is what the final product turned out to be, which is more important than what the exact specifications of who contributed what individual components to the blends are. So I don't want to never say never. Certainly we're always innovating and creating new things, and that might be something that we look at, in the coming year or two. But as of right now, for the production schedule that we're looking at, it is not in line at the moment.
Good to know. Never say never.
Never say never, like Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber world tour.
So this is more of like, I think he's, Michael Osur asks, he wants to know, like, how do you guys stand out? How do you distinguish your whiskey/bourbon from other brands? I guess, well, let's focus on Stellum, since that's what we're talking about this month.
Yeah. Brian, you want to take that one? You have a great answer for this.
Well, I think that, what's really important is that we're not, first and foremost, as a newer brand in Stellum, it's not trying to recreate something that it's not, first off. It's not trying to claim some piece of time in Americana or history or a resurrected grandfather's recipe or anything like that. But it is a new voice in bourbon. And it is by taking what we've talked about so much tonight, about all these beautiful flavors in bourbon, and trying to create the best possible blend for the next generations, for the next, century of bourbon here. So as a completely flavor-driven company, we're hitting that mark of that flavor, and think that we're standing out by bringing some different flavors to the party with all these different mash bills. But really, again, taking something where the sum is much more than its parts. We're taking great bourbons to start with, and we're blending them together to create a really, really beautiful and elegant blend that's definitely dynamic.
And to your point, Brian, I think that like sourced whiskey's been around for like a really long time. I think we all know that. For a couple of years, it was like a really kind of like dirty little secret almost with some companies, and it was like
we went through that phase at Eureka. I've been at Eureka for almost 11 years, and there was a certain point where we're just like, we were like on the fence, and we kind of were just like, well, let's wait and see how the industry reacts. But I remember a certain point, it was like, oh, you source your whiskey? Like, we don't want anything to do with you if you source your whiskey. And I feel like obviously that it's changed so much since then. But yeah, no, we were one of those companies where we were like on the fence. It's like, do we want to carry sourced whiskey? Do we just want to carry like?
I totally get it. And I think, a reason for that is, for a really long time, creating a whiskey brand is expensive, right? Like, that's why sourcing exists. You have to age whiskey for many years before it's good enough to bottle. If you're going to distill it, you have to build a distillery, which is not cheap, and you have to hire the labor, and then you have to wait years and years to actually sell your first bottle of something. And so there's two kind of ways around that. One way is distilling vodka or gin, and that doesn't need to age, and just kind of selling that to kind of get some quick capital, which there's nothing wrong with doing. Or there's, buying barrels that somebody else has distilled and have already aged partially, so that you can kind of skip that first part of the process. And what a lot of companies did for a really long time was they took those barrels, they, maybe let them age for a couple more years. They maybe diluted them by changing, adding water, changing the proof a little bit. And then they put their brand name on it and sold it as their brand. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. That's a very, very common industry practice. But some places were not wildly transparent about the fact that that was what they were doing. And so it kind of, again, like to your point, Trevor, made kind of a nasty sort of reputation for sourced whiskey that took years and years and years to shake. And so what I think that we're doing at our company that's quite different is we're being, from the get-go, really, really transparent about the ideology and the creativity and sort of the mission of what our brand is and what we're trying to do.
You're owning it.
Yeah, we've always been unapologetically blenders. We tell everybody we do not distill, we don't have stills. We're based in Kentucky, yes, but we don't, that doesn't mean that we distill things in Kentucky. We age things there. That's where we blend things. And so I think that just that in and of itself is really, really unique. And if anybody, during this or after this or later, decides to go to either of our websites, stellumspirits.com or barrelbourbon.com, you'll see that we are really, really communicative about every single thing that we have ever made. We have like a small paragraph or a large paragraph, depending on what product you're looking at, that kind of details what the thought process was in creating that particular blend, what barrels or groups of barrels rather that had these interesting flavor profiles or proofs or whatever did we look at to put together as part of the ingredients of that particular batch, that particular bottling. And we get really, really into it. And that's really important to us to kind of spread that word out to people and let them know, like, hey, this is what we're doing and it's really cool. Let's think about it.
That's awesome. Just moving on here, getting a few more questions in. It looks like we got about a little over 10 minutes left. So Matt Vargo asks, when blending, how do you walk the line between creating a whiskey with balance, but preventing it from being quote unquote boring?
That's a great question. I guess my first response to that would be, I'm trying to think of like a clever, I'm not fast enough right now because I'm not drinking enough whiskey to be fast enough right now. But I would say
that makes you faster.
Yeah, doesn't it make everyone faster? I mean, there's a balancing line.
Well, for a very yeah. There's a window. There's a window, right?
But I would say
go ahead. I was gonna say balance is super important when you're blending the whiskey. So obviously that's going to be important. You don't want to have something that's out of balance because while it might be interesting, it's just not going to be good and you're not going to continue to go back and buy another bottle of it. So, I think a really easy answer to that is we're using really dynamic whiskeys to blend the Stellum product. So we're pretty confident that it's not going to be boring based on the selections that we took of those whiskeys to start with. But really, when we're trying to balance that whiskey out there, we're going for that classic bourbon profile. And when we blend to taste and to flavor and not to a specific yield. Once we reach that flavor that we're looking for in a blend, we stop. So I think that's where one of the things that's a lot different from what we do and maybe some other people is that we distill to flavor or blend to flavor. I'm sorry, and we stop whenever we reach that desired flavor.
Yeah, I was gonna say something like, I don't think all balanced whiskeys are boring. I don't think balance necessarily means that it's not interesting. I think that it means that the people who put the product together did a really good job of balancing the different.
Balance is hard.
Balancing different flavor profiles.
I don't think people give enough credit to balance.
Mm-hmm.
To create a balanced cocktail, to make a balanced beer, there's a lot of art that goes behind balance.
Totally. I mean, think about, I always liken this to cooking. I mean, if you're making a dish, right? Say you're making like a piece of chicken, you need to salt it. You need to add you don't need to, but if you're making like a really good piece of chicken, you might want to add like some fresh herbs to the top when you're done with it. If you add like a layer of, if you're doing like a chicken parm, you want like that really nice, like
I don't mess
breaded,
around with unseasoned
breaded
food.
crunch.
Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm okay. All right. I want listen. I've been to Eureka. I've had the food. It's well seasoned. It's very good.
Sorry.
But you never know. So, but yeah, if you're doing like a chicken parm or something, like think about it like that. Like you've got like your really good chicken breast, you've got like the really nice crunch of like the breadcrumb like over the top. You've got like the nice melted cheese that adds like that, like almost viscosity, that creaminess to it. And then you've got like some fresh basil like right on the top that adds that final, just that fresh herb pop like right at the end. And
I'm
all of those
hungry
things,
now, so thank you.
yeah, but all of those things work together. If you overdid it on the basil, or if you didn't salt your breadcrumb seasoning, or if you didn't use enough cheese and it was just like a little drab over the top, like that dish wouldn't taste right. All of those ingredients work together in harmony, in tandem, to create the perfect thing, which is what our barrels do.
Yeah, and I think you guys knock it out of the park. It's a great balanced whiskey, but I think what you've sought out to achieve as far as like being the best in the market for this price point, in my opinion, it's top tier. So
thank you.
Obviously I chose it to feature. So I like it.
I hope you like it. Yeah.
Yeah. We got a couple more questions here. So Josh Johnson asks, can you tell me more about the daisy chain blending technique? I read a bit about it, but still haven't quite wrapped my head around it. I'll be honest, I don't know what he's talking about, but maybe either of you do.
I am not wildly familiar with that. I do know that it is a blending technique that Tripp talks about sometimes in his podcast, which Joe might mention once or twice in some interviews. But I'm not gonna lie, I don't know enough about how they do a daisy chain blend to create our final products. I would be happy to get the answer to that while I'm in Kentucky this week and email you, Trevor, if you wanted to blast out that response to everybody.
Is it like the Solera method where they are taking? I have no idea. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the term, but like the Solera method where you're taking like small bits of the previous batch and mixing in with the next batch and always taking from the previous, and I don't know.
Yeah, that is the roughly like the idea of kind of what we do. We don't do an actual Solera because we're not continuing to age once we add different barrels into other barrels. So it's not exactly a Solera, but I do, that methodology, that idea of taking something from one barrel, putting it in another barrel that already has some liquid and kind of moving the blend along that way. That is certainly something that we do. When we're making our blends, typically we make them in groups. So Joe and Tripp will start with, and Nick for that matter, who's also on one of our blenders. We'll start with, one or two groups of barrels usually that they think are really interesting, that they want to play off of each other. And then they will slowly layer in other barrels on top of the existing blend and let it just kind of sit and mellow for a few weeks to a few months until they've kind of hit exactly what they're looking for. So my best answer to the daisy chain thing would be starting with 2 or 3 like individual groups that have really different flavor profiles, blending those together, and then layering more on top slowly, barrel by barrel, until we kind of get to where we want to be with the final product. That's a great question.
Brian Fortman wants to know where I got my where you can get ghost pepper tincture. Brian, you got to make it yourself. Proprietary recipe. That's all I'll say. I think we have time for a couple more here, and then we got to choose our winners. The Bourbon Collect, you can follow them on Instagram, wants to know how many people are involved in the actual blending and tasting.
Brian, you want to take that one? Want to talk about our blending team?
I really don't want to mess up any of these numbers here and who's all involved. So I'll let you go ahead and get them some shout outs.
Yeah, absolutely. So our blending team consists of just 4 people. There's 3 people who are in Kentucky permanently, and then 1 who lives in New York, who flies in and out of Kentucky quite frequently. But Joe, of course, Joe Beatrice, who owns the company, is our founder and CEO and the blender guy. But then his right-hand man is Trip Stimson. Trip is our master blender and director of distillery operations. And Trip comes from, he's been with us since about 2000, like he started consulting with us in 2016. And I believe he joined full-time in early 2017. So he just had his 5-year anniversary, I believe, on the blending team. But he came to us from first the Kentucky Artisan Distillery. And then before that, he had spent 9 years at Brown-Forman, working primarily on Jack Daniels. And he has a really long degree, something to do with like chemistry or chemical engineering that I, as a journalism and Spanish major, can never seem to retain. But Trip is a very, very talented blender.
Okay.
Estificial, Trevor. But Trip comes from a really solid chemical distillation engineering background. And so he's just been doing that his entire professional life. And then they're joined by Nick Christensen, she's been with us since, I believe, 2018, September 2018. For the first couple of years, she was our single barrel program manager and an assistant blender, but she just got promoted to full-blown blender and manager of blending operations. She has one of the best palates I've ever seen. She comes to us from behind the bar. She worked at one of the best bars in Louisville, Kentucky called Butchertown Grocery. And she was the bar director there. And so she knew Joe and Trip from just being based in Louisville and running a program that worked a lot with barrel products. And Joe and Trip were really impressed by her palate and eventually brought her on when she decided that she wanted to switch sides and go to the other side of the bar. So those 3 people who are based in Kentucky.
So they found her at this bar? They were just like, that's super cool.
Yeah, well, like most suppliers, you go out and you visit your accounts and you sit at the bar and you say thank you and you eat and whatever you drink. And you asked to meet the buyer and she was the buyer and she came out and said hi. And then I think she did a couple of single barrel picks at Butchertown Grocery actually for barrels. This was years before we launched Stellum. And I believe they were one of the first places in Kentucky to do barrel picks with us. And so just kind of being an early supporter of the brand and charming the pants off of Joe and Trip when they sat down, or maybe it was, vice versa. Who knows? I'm sure they were equally charmed by each other. But she decided to come on board with us just about 3.5 years ago, and now is a full-blown member of the blending team. And she's got an exceptional palate. Almost all of our single barrels that we have were picked by her. She works a lot with our private release programs, private release bourbons and private release whiskeys on the barrel side. But she's really great. So they're the 3 that are based in Kentucky, and then the 4th is. If anybody remembers my partner for this when we did the barrel one in November is Will Schragus, who is our chief sales officer and chief product innovation officer. So Will's based in New York, but he's in Kentucky quite a bit. And he comes from the craft spirit side of things. He originally went to culinary school in California. And he worked for a lot of craft spirits brands. He worked at an auction house for wine, and he was a buyer for a really big craft spirits retail store in upstate New York. And so he just kind of knows a lot of people in the weird, interesting wine and Madeira and sherry and rum agricole and Armagnac and cognac worlds and old Scotch worlds. And he's got a really good finger, not just a really great palate, but also a really good finger on the pulse of what's interesting, what's going to be trending in a few months that we should get ahead of and start working on and kind of be some of the first people to release that thing. So he's very, very heavy in product development, if not actual blending.
Sounds like a great team.
They're fun.
I'd love to sit in on a tasting one time, but I'll talk to Will, I guess. I don't know. Or you put a good word in for me.
I got you. We're there this week. I'll see if I can slip one in while we're karaokeing on Wednesday night.
What's your go-to karaoke song? That's my question.
Ooh, my go-to is usually Spiderwebs by No Doubt.
No Doubt. Nice.
Yeah. But let's be honest, I'm not singing it. I am yelling it more than I. What about you, Brian?
Brian, go-to karaoke song.
I'm not going to share because Stephanie needs to be surprised on Wednesday when she hears my rendition of this lovely song. No, not having it.
What about you, Trevor? What's yours?
So I have 3 kind of go-tos. I think I don't know why I'm having deja vu here. I think maybe on a previous call we've talked about this, but Boys in the Hood, but the White Boy version, the Dynamite Hack White Boy version, one hit wonder from the late 90s, early 2000s. or Backstreet Boys, I Want It That Way.
Solid.
Yeah.
That's a good one. All right.
But, have fun at karaoke.
We'll have to get you
That
in for the
sounds
next trip.
I think last time we were in Nashville, we did karaoke. Anyways, let's pick the winners. We're just about an hour here, so we want to make sure we pick some winners here. I'm going to just run through the questions, and Brian, you get to pick your favorite, and then Stephanie, you get to pick the second. Stephanie, I believe you picked first last time, so I'm going to let Brian pick first.
Totally fair.
This time. Okay. So Kyle Rogers, we had the textured label question. We had Kevin Bird asked is there going to be a mashup between Stellum and Barrel? Michael Osur asked how you distinguish yourself from other brands. Matt Vargo asked what do you do in blending that, to create balance but not be boring. Josh Johnson had the daisy chain question. Bourbon Collect had how many people does it take for blending? And I think that's it. Those are the questions. So, Brian, what is your favorite?
I really appreciated the opportunity to answer the question about how we distinguish ourselves from everybody else in the market. So I like that question.
And that was Michael Osur.
Great job, Michael.
Yay, Michael. Okay, so I liked that question a lot too. I'm actually going to go with the daisy chain question. It is not often that we get stumped on these. And I think that question showed that this person is really familiar with our brand and did some background research before coming to this, which I really appreciate that extra effort and interest. So I'm going to go with that question.
All right. Now I have to play bad guy. I think they're really good questions. I think they're very two different questions. I think I'm going to go daisy chain for my favorite question. And I agree. It's always nice to have someone on that, kind of did some research, listened to maybe some interviews with Joe beforehand, and kind of came in knowing. Michael, great question as well. Awesome swag bag coming your way. Josh Johnson, you're going to have the signed bottle coming your way, so we will arrange that. And Michael Osur, you'll have the swag bag. I think two great prizes. And as always, we appreciate everyone's participation. We are just over an hour here, and I know, Stephanie, it's about a little past 10 your time, so you're probably wanting to sneak into Will's room to grab that bottle.
Grab my bottle of Stellum bourbon.
Yeah, exactly. Brian, it's been a pleasure. I hope to meet you in person one day, and thank you very much for your time. And go out and get some. Once you finish this bottle of Stellum bourbon, go out and buy another. And the rye is delicious as well. And cheers, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.